Hi, my name is Christopher. I persevere because I know within that all challenges have solutions. The solution can be so significant that it can change the world and impact humanity in a positive way. A great leader by the name of Mr. Carl Anderson once said, "We are either in the process of quitting or overcoming." So when I think about the word perseverance, I get excited about the idea of seeing what the outcome will be if I don't quit, if I do not give up. What will the outcome be if I persevere? As humans, we have to persevere in order to grow. You see, oftentimes when we least expect it, life presents us with a challenge to test our courage and resilience. When we push through these challenges, we find success. To persevere is to be human, and my generation will persevere when we return back to the surface of the moon, when we step foot on Mars, and as we explore beyond. Space education is important for several reasons. When we have the opportunity to study space, it not only helps us understand space, it also helps us understand our planet better. Also, we humans are naturally curious, so space education provides us with endless opportunities to explore limitless unknowns and to solve mysteries within our universe. I happen to think that learning about space is a lot of fun. When we strive to learn more about the space environment, we end up gaining a lot of knowledge that helps us understand our planet. We are able to develop amazing space technologies that benefit from space and life here on planet Earth.
Welcome, everyone. That is my dear kiddo that I know that has been part of my life now for a year. I hope you're encouraged by that. It warms my heart. He will surely venture into the stars. I am so thankful to all of you for joining us today. Today, we are engaging in a conversation. The events of 2020 have impacted all of us deeply, even as we continue making progress toward our goal of realizing our visions for space exploration. We cannot ignore challenges here on Earth. Earlier this year, Explore Mars embarked on a journey to champion and foster a more diverse and inclusive environment like we've never done before. We took action, including standing up a series of discussions featuring diverse voices and ideas. Today's panel, Celebrating Black Lives in the Space Industry, an exchange of leadership stories and experiences. And tomorrow's presentation will be from one of our very distinguished panelists that is part of our ongoing series. You will hear from dynamic space leaders who have achieved great success. They have graciously agreed to share their experiences and their stories today. This is our opportunity to listen, really listen, to reflect and to contemplate how we can move forward together. And on that note, it is my great privilege to introduce our moderators, Dr. Sian Proctor and Mr. J.R. Edwards. Dr. Sian Proctor is a force of nature, an explorer, geoscientist, STEM communicator, and aspiring astronaut, and a member of the ExploreMars Board of Directors. Mr. J.R. Edwards of Lockheed Martin Corporation is also a member of our Board of Directors here at Explore Mars. He's no stranger to Explore Mars and the global space community, a dynamic and visionary business leader. His career achievements and contributions to the global space community ultimately led to JR's recognition before the United Nations General Assembly. Welcome, Sian and JR and your esteemed panel. I give it over to you.
Thank you so much. Today, we are joined by real-life superheroes. Our first distinguished panelist, Major General Charles Frank Bolden Jr., is the founder and CEO emeritus of the Charles F. Bolden, LLC, a veteran-owned small business that specializes in aerospace, national security, and education. He currently serves as a regent of the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. General Bolden retired from the U.S. Marine Corps in 2003 after serving 34 years on active duty, including 14 years as a member of NASA's Astronaut Corps. He flew 4 space shuttle missions. He was inducted into the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame in May 2006 and enshrined in the National Aviation Hall of Fame in May 2006 in October 2017. General Bolden was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the 12th Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. He served as head of the agency from 2009 to 2017. As administrator, Bolden led a worldwide NASA team to advance the mission and goals of the United States space program. For those of us throughout the space community who've had the great pleasure of working with him, he's a trailblazer, a treasured mentor, a champion, an advocate, and friend. But perhaps most important, he is a devoted son and beloved husband, father, and grandfather.
Mr. Leland Melvin is a former NASA astronaut and material sciences research engineer. He served on 2 Space Shuttle Atlantis missions to build the International Space Station. He headed NASA's education program, co-chaired the White House's Federal Coordination in STEM Education Task Force, and chaired the International Space Education Board. He has advised multiple defense and space organizations. He is the author of Chasing Space, an astronaut's story of grit, grace, and second chances. He is an MIT Media Lab Fellow, a board member of BWX Technologies, and has received 5 honorary doctorates for science, philanthropy, and education. He was drafted in 1986 to play in the National Football League for the Detroit Lions and Dallas Cowboys. He is a passionate rescue dog advocate.
Thanks, Sian.
Dr. Camille Alleyne. She is a rocket engineer, internationally acclaimed speaker, writer, educational leader, and science ambassador who has dedicated her 25-year career to advancing the areas of space exploration, specifically in the fields of human spaceflight, space vehicle systems engineering, and space research. Dr. Alleyne is also an expert in the areas of space, science, and technology application in international development. Dr. Alleyne currently serves as the Deputy Manager for Commercial Lunar Payload Services at NASA Johnson Space Center, where she is responsible for developing the strategy for and managing the public-private partnership to deliver NASA science instruments to the lunar surface. How cool is that? Prior to that, she served as the Assistant Deputy Associate Administrator for Programs in the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters.
Thank you so much, JR. It's great to be here.
Dr. Danielle Wood serves as an assistant professor in the program in Media Arts and Sciences and holds a joint appointment in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Professor Wood is the founding director of the Space-Enabled Research Group, which seeks to advance justice in Earth's complex systems using designs enabled by space. In pursuit of this mission, Professor Wood draws from a background that includes satellite design, earth science applications, systems engineering, and technology policy. Prior to serving as faculty at MIT, Professor Wood held positions at NASA headquarters, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, Aerospace Corporation, Johns Hopkins University, and the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. Professor Wood studied at MIT, where she earned a doctorate in engineering systems, a master's in aeronautics and astronautics, a master's in technology policy, and a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. Students who are fortunate to study with Professor Wood benefit from the very best of mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy. Thank you for joining us today, our distinguished panelists. We want to welcome you all, but we want to begin by acknowledging the significance of this moment in history with a worldwide pandemic, civil unrest and peaceful protests, economic uncertainty, and of course, the tragic losses of Black lives and role models. Yet we persevere. We dream of a better tomorrow through human spaceflight, and we offer our voices. We come together today to celebrate the unique experiences of Black lives in the space industry. It is through the sharing of our stories on leadership, hope, resiliency, grit, and perseverance by individuals like our distinguished panelists that we can design future narratives to be just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive as we strive for the moon, Mars, and beyond. We begin our discussion with why space? Was it always your first choice? Why or why not? And I'm going to start this one to Leland because I have a feeling, Leland, space was not your first choice.
Sian, you're right. It was not my choice. 1969, the moon landing, I was the antenna engineer holding the antennas for my parents while they watched this thing. And the next day, all the kids in the neighborhood said, "Do you want to be an astronaut?" I'm like, "No, I don't see someone who looks like me." And so 5 blocks down the street from where I grew up, Arthur Ashe learned how to play tennis. And my dad talked about his perseverance, his athleticism, his intelligence. So I wanted to be like him. And it wasn't until I got to NASA when a friend said, "You'd be a great astronaut," and he handed me an application. I didn't fill it out, but I filled it out when my friend Charlie Camarda got in, because I said, if that guy can get in, I can get in. So that's when I applied.
Wow, that's really interesting because, again, when we talk about representation matters, would another one of our panelists like to say why space for them? Was it not your first choice? How did you get into it? Camille?
I'll go. So I don't know if it was my first choice, but it was one of the first things I remember as a child growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, where I was born and raised. At the age of 6 or 7 years old, I would sit on the trunk of my dad's car every night and stargaze and be so fascinated by the night sky, not even knowing what that was. And the concept of space, I had no idea, in this small dot in the Caribbean Sea, right? But when in high school, I was really great in math and science, and I loved planes because we traveled a lot to the US as a family. And so I decided that we had a family friend who was an engineer. I knew he made a lot of money, and I said, that's what I'm doing. So I said, I'll do aeronautical engineering because I love planes. I want to learn how to design that. But it actually wasn't until I migrated to the US as a freshman in college, January 20th, 1986, right? The Space Shuttle Challenger exploded and tragically killing the 7 crew members on board. And the trajectory of my life changed, because before that, I didn't know there was a thing called a space shuttle or rocket, or there was a place called NASA that I could work and even aspired to be an astronaut. And so it was on that day that I set my sights on being an aerospace engineer, designing rockets and spacecraft. And 6 years after that, I was driving into the gates of Kennedy Space Center, and that was 25 years ago.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And it's those little moments that really make a difference in our lives and changes our trajectory. Charlie, how about you?
Mine, I'm sort of like Leland and a little bit like Camille also. I never dreamed of being an astronaut, never dreamed of going into the space program. In fact, growing up in the segregated South in Columbia, South Carolina, aviation was not something that I planned to do. I thought flying airplanes was inherently dangerous. And so that did not interest me. But I fell in love with a place called the United States Naval Academy, seeing it on television on a program called Men of Annapolis. I won't even bore you in telling you how difficult it was to get there and get through. But long story short, I had eventually decided, thanks to my now wife of 52 years, once I decided I was going in the Marine Corps and I was going to be an infantry officer, she pounded away at me and finally discouraged me sufficiently that we went to Pensacola, Florida. And first time I got in an airplane, I fell in love with aviation, but still no desire to fly in space. But I kept going at different things and eventually became a test pilot. And that was where I met the late, great Dr. Ron McNair. He was selected in the first group of space shuttle astronauts. He and several of his classmates came back to a place where I was stationed, Patuxent River, Maryland, the Naval Air Test Center. And I had a chance to talk to him throughout the weekend. Was really impressed, but still no interest in becoming an astronaut. Ron asked me before he got into his sleek-looking supersonic NASA T-38 to go back to Houston, hey, are you going to apply for the space program? I said, not on your life. And he looked at me real strange. He said, why not? I said, Ron, they'd never pick me. And he said, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. How do you know if you don't ask? And what he did was embarrass me because I had grown up. My mom and dad were both teachers. My father was my high school football coach. And they had told me all my life, you can do anything you want to do. And I had actually forgotten that. And so Ron shook me back into where my mom and dad had left me. When he left to go back to Houston, I picked up my pen and paper, applied, had an opportunity to go to Houston and interview, and was selected in the second group of space shuttle astronauts. So that's the way I got into the space program, quite by happenstance.
It really is amazing how the people around us, even in passing by, can have big influences on us. And so, Danielle, how about you?
Thanks so much. I never get tired of hearing these stories from my fellow panelists. My story also has a journey, and I think it's just wonderful that we can honor Ron McNair's role. I didn't have the privilege of meeting him in person, but at MIT, I had a chance to study in the building named after him, the Ronald McNair building. But I was also watching. I was a young child on the day we lost one of our first space shuttle missions. But I grew up in Florida, and I had a chance to feel close to the space program. And I can really thank my parents for celebrating every milestone in the space community. So as much as we could, we tried to go outside, and even just in Orlando, watch launches. Even if they were a bit far away, you could really enjoy them. So I celebrated space, but I didn't see myself as part of the team really until a few key people in high school encouraged me to apply for a summer high school program that gave me a chance to be on site at Kennedy Space Center for the full summer of 1999. And I always love to give credit, especially because that year the Chandra X-ray telescope was launching. And we had two women who were really taking leadership roles in the deployment of Chandra, Alleyne Collins and Catherine Coleman. But it's been wonderful that I had a chance to watch them on the third try. There's several late night launches, and I had the chance to see them launch. And again, I was really excited about all that the mission meant. I was excited about the science and about the team. And I think it took me a while to realize that I could have a career in that field. Later, I also asked myself, how could I have a space engineering field that also mixed with my other passions? Part of my work really pushed myself to explore how I could serve communities around the world, especially women of color, because I was becoming more and more aware as a high school student and a college student that the world was not fair and that women of color faced many challenges around the world. I used to volunteer at a school in Kenya and ask myself, if I become a space engineer, will I be able to do work that's relevant to these children and these families in Kenya? So ultimately, NASA also helped me find the answer to that as I saw examples of NASA scientists and engineers dedicating a combination of their work to advancing human exploration, but also finding ways to transfer benefits from space to people around the world. And that's when I really committed to being in the space community for the long term.
Thank you, Danielle, so much for sharing your story. Thank you all for sharing. How did you become a leader in an environment with very few role models and an environment that might not have always been welcoming? Perhaps Danielle, would you like to start us off?
Thank you so much, JR. The question is important. Right now, I have the best job I could ever want, although working for Charlie was also a wonderful job. Definitely want to celebrate that one. And in my next role, I have this chance to serve as a professor at MIT, lead a team, and help develop opportunities to do research and practice coverage from around the world, and to make things better using space technology. Now, in my current role, I play a role as a faculty and a member of the community, but I'm the first Black woman to play this role in both my departments, at the Media Lab at MIT and in our Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So you could say that I didn't have examples before me when I was a student and a researcher to aspire to become a Black woman faculty. However, I think it's so important that people who don't look like me have played a key role to help me find my way. So I can say that many faculty of different color and gender have helped me understand how to pursue graduate studies. I could make a long list of particular faculty, many who are white men, but they took the effort to explain to me the steps and the skills I would need to be successful in graduate school and through my work in industry and government. I've had people of all different backgrounds. So sometimes it means being willing to learn and basically translating the experience of somebody who has a different background than me to benefit my own. But I'm also so thankful that I could listen to and gain the benefit from people from a variety of backgrounds, even when there were no people with just my same profile to aspire to.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And Camille, would you like to share?
Yes, thank you, JR, for the question. For me, it started with people who I looked up to and I modeled my life after. They weren't necessarily people in aerospace or space, at least not on my early leadership journey. But my role model started with my mom, who is actually still alive at the young age of 90. But she was one strong and courageous woman who blazed trails and broke down barriers in Trinidad and Tobago and was so loved by so many. And I got my strength and my courage from her. And it has allowed me to often step out ahead and to blaze trails and walk the paths that are least traveled. But there are also people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa, all of who had a profound love for humanity. They fought for justice and they served the least amongst us. They really inspired me, and I try to model my life after them by speaking up for what is right and for what is just, and being able to have courageous conversations, even though they're difficult. And speaking up for those who don't feel empowered to speak up for themselves. But also there are other people along the way, like Katherine Johnson and Mary Jackson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Christine Darden, women we know as the hidden figures. All of them, along with the people I talked about, they lived their life with such grace and courage and dignity in the face of whatever came up for them, right? And so their lives serve as an example for me in the most difficult situations, that no matter what comes at you, and Lord knows, it hasn't always been easy as a Black woman in predominantly white spaces. I've seen and experienced a lot. But despite that, I hold my head up, keep moving forward, and trying always to make a difference for others. And so their lives have served as an example for me.
What roadblocks or challenges have you experienced, and how has it changed as you advanced into a leadership role? Charlie, help us understand how you navigated and persevered as you advanced in your career.
Yes, I am. Since I'm kind of old, and I grew up in the segregated South in Columbia, South Carolina, I've experienced three, and I'll categorize it in three broad areas. One area, when I talk about obstacles, is threats, whether they're verbal or physical or otherwise. The other is physical intimidation, and the third is just verbal harassment or intimidation. And if I go all the way back to growing up as a kid in Columbia, the threats then were things like lynchings and the like, where we lived in a neighborhood, we knew that that was our neighborhood, and we faced threats. Do not venture beyond where you live. My father helped me overcome that because he was my high school football coach. And although the schools were segregated, he became friends with a lot of the white coaches. And what they would do as the season got started was they would go behind fences, and because they recognized that in order to make our teams stronger, we needed to play people who were different than we were and might play a different style of football. So every year my dad went over and we played a school called Brooklyn Casey, or we played Eau Claire, the white schools, behind the fences, and nobody knew what was going on. So I learned an easy way to overcome the physical threats there. The threats to us. The physical part, I think I faced the first time I went to the Naval Academy, where the assumption was because I was Black that I couldn't swim. I was a competitive swimmer as all my life. So I was a damn good swimmer. And it was always funny because the instructors would see us get in the pool and they'd go get the shepherd's crook because they knew they were going to have to pull us out of the pool. And as I was doing my swims, one of the guys got really angry because I was doing pretty well. So he called me to the side and said that my stroke was wrong. So that, you know, that's another kind of way that they do it. So I improved my stroke in order to get through that. And I found that even in flight school when we went into the pool and the like. And then the final one that I'll share with you is just verbal threats. When I was a plebe at the Naval Academy, a freshman, toward the end of my plebe summer, I had two upper-class midshipmen who had been responsible for training us that summer come into my room, close the door, and one was from South Carolina, the other one was from Alabama. And they said, Mr. Bolden, just want to let you know you're not going to get through here. And I said, oh, is that right? And what's going to happen that's going to keep me from getting through? Little did they know that I didn't want to be there anyway. I had really struggled. I had fought to get to the Naval Academy. When I got there, I hated it because people were mean. There was discrimination and everything. I cried to my mom and dad every weekend saying I wanted to come home. And so the two of them came in and they verbally threatened me, told me that they were going to make sure that I didn't get through. And as much as I did not want to be there, their verbal threats made me decide, okay, I don't want to be here, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let them run me out of here. And it gave me the perseverance and resilience to hang in. And then you ask, how does it change as you advance? The higher up you get in rank, the more subtle the obstacles become. So even as the NASA administrator, I would see things where people would try to throw obstacles in front of you, but they became much more subtle, and you just learn that you kind of blow it off, you ignore it, and go do what you know how to do and relax and enjoy everything.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Just so powerful, what you've had to do to get where you are. Leland, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I really appreciate Charlie's stories because they always inspire me to stay motivated and keep moving forward. But I remember when I was in high school, I was in the car with my girlfriend, and a police officer rolled up on us, and he took her out of the car and told her that I was raping her because he wanted me to go to jail. And with young black men get into the prison system, that they really never get out. They never have a second chance. And I was going to college on scholarship. I wanted to be a chemistry major. And so trying to make sure that you navigate these potential roadblocks. And every father in the black community has a conversation with their son to tell them that if you get stopped by an officer, you assume the position, which is 10-2, you look straight ahead. You tell the officer, you're very respectful. You say you're reaching for your, all these things. And I've been to space 2 times. I've ridden this rocket with millions of pounds of thrust. And not once was I afraid going to space. It's when I've been stopped by police officers that I didn't even know that I was starting to sweat and was holding the steering wheel really hard. And so I think we have to ensure that the people that are listening to these stories, that they make sure that they do 2 things. One is make sure that they're not part of the problem, that they're not doing things like, yelling at Charlie or being discriminatory or telling him what he can or cannot do. So what are they doing to hurt? And then what are they doing to help? Being anti-racist versus not a racist. And I think those are the things that we as a community of people, that when we look at the planet from the space station, if any one of us makes a mistake, we're all gone. And we need to bring that reality back down here to Earth, especially when we go to Mars.
Charlie and Leland, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Indeed, this is an experience that we are birthed into. We live this journey each day, and we're grateful for you sharing in such a transparent way. If we trace our history from the arrival of the first African people to the American hemisphere, we see that Black people as a group have needed to creatively resist discriminatory policies at every stage of US history. Now we are living in an era of the first Black president, the first Black NASA administrator, and possibly the first Black female vice president of the United States. So this suggests we've made considerable progress, but have we really? In light of the Black Lives Matter protest, I Can't Breathe, the global protest, what work does the space community still need to do to be part of the progress toward an anti-racist future? Charlie, would you like to share?
Yeah, JR, thanks very much for phrasing the question. You know, first of all, let me answer part of the question that says, have we really come very far? And I will quote, or I will paraphrase the late John Lewis, who I admired deeply, and I just remember every moment I had an opportunity to share with him during my time as the NASA administrator, when he said, if you don't think we've made some progress, walk a mile in my shoes. This is not the 50s. This is not the 60s and not the 70s. But it is by no means a time that we can relax and say we have come so very far. We've come a long way, but there's way too far to go. And I think, you know, being the NASA administrator, one of the things that I used to tell everybody was, while I was honored to serve for the first Black president and lead the world's greatest space agency, I took no comfort in that, and I still don't, until I see a second Black administrator, second, third, fourth, a first female administrator. So those are the kinds of things that when you say, what will the space community have to do? We'll have to act instead of talking. I go through highs and lows now when you talk about what was the impact of George Floyd in the last 3 to 6 months. Highs and lows of excitement, but incredible disappointment, particularly the last couple of weeks, with the lack of any empathy on the part of my supposed white friends who, after George Floyd came in to the rescue, and they were anxious to help overcome this great whatever it is that we face, and they spoke with great empathy and concern. And then after the problems that we had in Portland and in Milwaukee and other places, all of a sudden, when you look at the polls, then the concern for Black Lives Matter is tending to go down. That's exactly what happened, and always happens when people get really excited about doing the right thing. And then they say, you know, but that takes a lot of work. Like Leland said, do things, do something. And that's my frustration right now, my disappointment in my fellow colleagues in the space program, is that everybody talks about what we need to do, and they make a few efforts, and then they cool off, and we go back to where we were before.
Charlie, yes, indeed. We find ourselves in a moment of great opportunity. And I'd like to pull on this thread a little bit. Why did George Floyd impact us so deeply? Why is this such a significant moment in our history? And how have you personally been impacted over the past 3 months? And Leland, would you like to share? And in fact, why don't we open that up to the entire group?
Yeah, JR, thank you for the question. I was in Florida, you know, on the scrub for one of the most technologically advanced things that we're doing, sending Doug and Bob to the International Space Station on white South African's new company, SpaceX rocket, for the first time, the Crew Dragon. And we're doing this thing, and I see this Black man getting his life snuffed out, saying that he can't breathe. And when I heard him calling for his mother, that's when I started crying, because I thought about my mother. I thought about if that was me, being the life snuffed out of me, and we're waiting to send people up to the International Space Station. If we can do that, we can do anything. We can fix these problems. And like Charlie said, it's when the people that let this movement wane don't do things like questioning themselves as to why aren't there more women like Camille in a higher leadership role, running the agency or in positions of authority, more authority and more power. And I think once we have the most diverse workforce, there's been a 2014 Scientific American article that said the most diversity brings you the most innovation and the most solutions. When people realize to bring this diversity to bear, we will have better systems, we'll have better solutions, and we will be on Mars. And I think that is the criticality, is that we will be better for our diversity.
JR, can I really quick?
Sure.
You know, it's really hard. I've become the angry Black man. I said this on another panel I was on a couple of weeks ago, because I'm 74 years old, and I'm actually tired of hearing people say, I didn't know. when you ask why did George Floyd have such an impact, it's because it put it right in your face. And you could no longer say, I didn't know. And, you know, we watched Mr. Blake be shot in the back 7 times at close range. You can't say you didn't know. And to all of a sudden now look and say, yeah, but we've got these demonstrators in the street who are being, you know, who are wrecking buildings and the like. That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. And it needs to stop. And all of us need to say that. But that's not an excuse for the kinds of actions that we have seen with George Floyd and Mr. Blake and Breonna Taylor and others. So my frustration and my anger comes from, I'm tired of hearing people say, I don't know, or I didn't know. You damn did know. You've known it all along. So it's now time to act. And that's just the frustration I have.
Yes, and so many share that frustration, Charlie. And Camille, do you mind sharing with us what did you feel in that moment of George Floyd?
So I was like Leland. He was on screen and I was actually watching him commentating on the launch. So it was that weekend of the SpaceX launch. And I had such a roller coaster ride of emotions. I mean, the exhilaration of the launch and the historic nature of what we were accomplishing. And in that moment, I was thinking, wow, like we could all look at that and see what we could accomplish, you know, if we all came together. And then on the other hand, it was the sheer trauma and emotions, exhaustion, the despair of what was going on, what we had witnessed, right? And that wasn't the first time for any of us on the panel, like Charlie and Leland said. I mean, we have witnessed this as Black people countless times. I mean, the list is so long. Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Alton Sterling. I mean, Erica. I mean, the list it goes on and on. And here we are. The nation got to watch this because we were all like cooped up in quarantine, right? But that Monday morning, I'll tell you a story. That Monday morning after the launch, I got up and I was struggling. I was so depressed. And I was getting text messages from my friends at work who were also struggling. And I decided in that moment, oftentimes, you know, we have just shown up and we've witnessed these things. We've shown up, we've put a brave face on and we've put a smile on our face and we show up for work like nothing has happened, right? Because that's what we need to do sometimes. And that morning I said, you know what, I can't, I'm not going to. I'm going to show up authentically and as my true self and how I was feeling. And I remember reaching out to our leaders and saying, people are not okay. There are a lot of people in our community at JSC who are not okay. And I hope we, you know, feel like they want to feel supported and they want to feel seen. And I think that was one of the catalysts for some of the difficult and uncomfortable conversations that we've been having at least at our center, you know. And so it was for me that moment of, no, you're gonna show up and you're gonna show up as your true authentic self and don't pretend like these things are, you know, okay and don't bother you.
Camille, what you describe is really, really powerful. This idea of honoring and expressing your authentic self, even as you are wearing the mask, even as you are committed to mission success, to performance. Danielle, would you like to share with us your experience?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. There are 2 stories I want to add that go right along with the themes we've been hearing. Many of us were with our families in some way, either virtually or in person. And my family was texting on May 30th when we were ready for that second attempt for the SpaceX launch. And we were so thankful, of course, to be seeing Leland on the screen. It turned out my dad sent a text just expressing his sadness as he was thinking about the news and the reactions to George Floyd's death. He was feeling a variety of things. And he expressed that he was so proud on one hand of being excited about the NASA launch, but also felt it seemed like such a juxtaposition, such a difference in terms of being able to see on one hand something very celebratory and very important for our country, but on the other hand, really grieving what was happening in terms of the response to George Floyd's death. And both grieving the death and also the need for really changes in policy. Actually, it was really encouraging that even within our family text circle, my husband sent a text just showing the picture of Leland and of course also Lauren Lyons from SpaceX, highlighting the opportunity we had to have somebody who's a friend, but also who's a representative of the Black community right there in front and center telling the story of the SpaceX launch. And my dad really expressed that gave him some encouragement. He was, of course, still grieving all the challenges our country faces, but it gave him something positive to think about that day. I just was happy to thank Leland for this as we've celebrated. And I want to also add and really appreciate that a few journalists took the extra effort to explore this issue. I want to really appreciate Space News as well as Quartz. And there's several others that also did particular stories asking how the space community was affected by George Floyd's death, particularly highlighting the work of Deborah Warner, Caleb Henry, and Tim Fernholz. I was fortunate to be interviewed for some of these stories, and it gave me a chance to speak publicly on the way that white supremacy, meaning the kind of privilege that really enables certain groups in our society, especially people of European descent, to gain benefits that make it more difficult for other groups to have good outcomes in areas like economics and healthcare. And I was so thankful to be able to express in print, and in this case in an article, that it's that area that we need to all study and learn more about from our history, from political scientists, from others, so we can better understand why these things have happened historically. So I was thankful for the people who were courageous enough to take the opportunity to listen to people across the Black community and ask, what is it people need to know about why this is happening and how the space community is part of the story to make a difference?
Thank you, Danielle, for sharing. I want to follow up with another question, starting with you, about the history of Black people overcoming oppression but yet being innovative in those circumstances. And how do we advance when it requires breaking down barriers and being bold, even assertive, with our desires to advance? I mean, for me, I know the angry Black woman, like Charlie had said, because when I come in and I'm bold and assertive, I get stereotyped and portrayed and limited.
Thanks so much for the question. I really want to celebrate that this year I have been dedicating a lot of my time to reading the work of queer Black feminists. And I want to just put out there, I think they have something to teach us. Many of them were working and living in the 1970s. And I'm fortunate to be living in Boston, where a whole group called the Combahee River Collective, naming themselves after Harriet Tubman's historic military action freeing about 700 slaves in South Carolina. The Combahee River Collective was a community that came together to ask, what is it that we can uniquely say as Black women about the social issues that need to change? And to be honest, as we've said, it's not the 1970s, but there are many things that they asked for in the 70s that we haven't achieved yet. So part of what I'm doing is asking, what can I learn from this historic series of women, not just in the 70s, but going all the way back to the beginning of time with different women surviving oppression. Another amazing story that I've always appreciated is a story of a woman who lived in slavery, but was able to escape slavery, but through a process that actually looked a lot like being an astronaut. It may sound strange, but she wanted to escape her owner. And the best way to do it was actually to hide locally so she could actually be near her children. And in order to do that, she hid in the attic of her family's home. And she was also able to write, which was of course illegal at the time, but she was able to learn to write and secretly kept a journal about her experience. She ended up needing to hide for 7 years, often laying down flat, and therefore, of course, her ability to walk was in danger. But just like an astronaut living in microgravity, she taught herself how to do enough exercise, even though it was very dangerous to come out of her hiding place. She exercised just enough to maintain her ability to walk. And later she did actually escape with her children and was eventually able to come to the north. And actually she's currently buried not far from where I am here in Boston, Massachusetts. But these stories of women who have bravery and great experiences and wrote and shared their stories, either verbally or in writing, this is what I'm drawing from these days, because I need their strength, I need their examples and creativity. And I need to remember that as I look at the oppression that's around us still, I'm drawing on a great legacy of leadership. And I can draw, of course, both from Black women, but also from people around the world of all different backgrounds, gender, and color.
Thank you, Danielle. When we're talking about voices and finding our voice and that being courageous to not only express our voice where we can be heard, but that we can actually get our vision or our message fulfilled. And I find that that is very difficult. Camille, do you have anything about this that you'd like to share?
Yes. So for me, I found my voice a little later in my life, like mid-30s. And I realized that I had something to say and that people wanted to hear what I had to say. And they would invite me to speak on different things. And so the more that happened, my voice got stronger and I gained more confidence in myself as a leader, right? But for me, it's always my intention when I raise or use my voice that it is in service of something greater, right? That I am empowering and enabling people to see their greatness. I also am very intentional about only using my voice for things I'm really passionate about. So that comes across. And I spoke earlier about having courage to speak up for the things you believe in. And I also speak about what's possible. You know, sometimes we get in this thing about, well, this is how it's always been done and it can't be any other way. And I like to say, well, what if this is possible? Or what is possible in this? So I like to bring that to the table. But then most importantly, I really just make the decision, as I just said, to always show up as my whole and best self and to always speak with my truest and authentic voice.
I think that is so powerful to have that ability to speak with your authentic voice. Does any of our other panelists want to just take a moment? We can go a few minutes long, thankfully, because this is such an important discussion. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to share? Charlie?
Yes, and if I can, and I'll use my mom. You know, my mother and my father are my role models. They're both looking down on us now, but they were my role models growing up, and my mentors. My father was, as I said, was my high school football coach, and he taught me a saying that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. So I learned that although I was a person of small stature, there wasn't anything I could not do. And as I mentioned, I forgot some of that when Ron asked me about applying for the space program. But when I look back at my mom, she was a very quiet but confident woman who, had a master's in library science from Atlanta University. When she came out of college, she started the first library for Black students in Columbia, South Carolina, at Waverly Elementary School. And it didn't make any difference what people told her could not be done. She just did it quietly and made a difference. She took part in the first group in South Carolina, first Human Relations Council, because she and several of her white acquaintances had seen the way that integration had not gone well throughout the South, and they did not want that to happen to South Carolina. So they kind of proactively planned the way that South Carolina was going to integrate. She became the first Black librarian to move into a formerly all-white school, and there she exhibited what she taught me: you take care of your people, and they'll take care of you. She loved her students and she cared for each and every one of them, whether they were white, Black, or anything. She had Governor Raleigh, former Secretary of Education Raleigh. His kids went to Dreher High School where she was, and he fell in love with her because of the way that she took care of his kids and made sure that they had a good education and that they stayed out of trouble. And she did it no matter whether they were white or Black. She felt that her job as a librarian and a teacher was to take care of the students, and things would work out. So I would say several people have asked, how does a young lady become the NASA administrator? Take care of your people as you're going along. Don't worry about yourself. Don't aspire to be well, that's dumb to say that, but don't focus on how do you make yourself stand out as much as you do. How do you take care of other people, and people will take care of you.
I love that message of taking care of each other and focusing on that, and everything else will fall into place. Leland?
I was so blessed to work for Charlie Bolden and have him take care of me. And just like Charlie, my mom and my dad were both my role models. And my father, when I was in middle school, He was a language arts teacher, but we were building a recreational vehicle out of a camper. And that's where I learned how to be a scientist and engineer, because we just used we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have any of that stuff to Google and find out how to do it, but we just did it. And as Charlie said, you have this thing inside of you, this belief, this hope, this perseverance, this grit, this determination. And if there's anything that you want to do out there, if you want to get to Mars, you want to be that first astronaut on Mars, just go for it. Just don't worry about imposter syndrome. Don't worry about what you don't have, what you don't have. And just remember this one thing, there's equality and there's justice, right? And equality is when everybody has the same thing. Justice is when you have exactly what you need to get the job done, to put yourself in the position that you want to be in. So make sure that you're not looking at everyone else and what they have. Make sure you go out there and get what you need, and you'll be that person putting those boots on Mars.
Leland, thank you so much for sharing. Charlie, those were powerful thoughts. It reminds me of the concept of the greater good, how we bring our best selves to our work daily, how we think about how we can bring value to each of our organizations, how we think about our commitment to our missions. It also reminds me of, Charlie, of what you described with your dear mother, this idea of do it and do it quietly. As we all know, millions are mourning the passing of Chadwick Boseman, who ascended to global fame via his role in Black Panther. And as folk are remembering him, I've seen many comments about his quiet nature, this idea that you serve and you serve quietly. He struggled and fought against a very serious disease, but he did so in quiet. He still performed. He still maintained that commitment to his work. And now let's shift gears just slightly to think about the challenges and opportunities within the space sector. As we think about how we can evolve to be more inclusive and diverse, from your experience and perspective, what advice or takeaway can you give our audience today? What are your hopes? What is your vision for the future? And why don't we open this up to everyone as well?
Yeah, I'll shoot real quickly. I am so happy. I'm elated. I'm excited to see that a Howard University alum, Chadwick Boseman, and a Howard University alum, Senator Kamala Harris, are two of the iconic people about whom everybody is speaking today, some admiringly and others derisively, but still people from a historically Black college and university. My experience in NASA over 20 plus years was when I look for good engineers of color,
it's 3 o'clock.
Frequently they came from historically Black colleges and universities, whether you're talking about Prairie View or Southern or Florida A&M, or you go on and on and on. I think this is a golden opportunity for people to follow the example of Chadwick Boseman and Kamala Harris, and stepping out, being very proud to say that they are from a historically Black college and university, and trying to encourage our students, our young students, to take a look at them as quality colleges and universities from which great leaders in this nation have come. So that would be one of the things that I would really encourage us to do.
Thank you, Charlie. Danielle, would you like to share?
It's such a pleasure. I am a teacher, and of course, we're about to start our fall semester. So I'm going to go straight to the classroom and invite you all to join me. I am so thankful that I am in a job where I can literally combine teaching people to design space systems, such as our work to develop a low-cost fuel for satellites using beeswax from around the world, with what it means to advance justice and anti-racism. So I'm going to recommend that everyone read 2 books. The first is a science fiction piece. It's part of a series by Nnedi Okorafor, and hope that everyone will check out Nnedi's books. She's a woman of Nigerian descent, Nigerian American, and she writes stories of amazing Black women doing extraordinary things. The Binti series talks about a woman who is about 17 or 18, going off to college. She's of African descent, but she is going to college on a different planet. She's bringing all her intelligence and her ingenuity, and she's doing space travel as part of her story. And I'm so inspired to see this next generation of Afrofuturism, of stories that help us understand what it means to be Black in the context of space, creating positive stories and new role models that we haven't seen before this generation. Although I do want to also highlight the work of Octavia Butler and all the great legacy she put before us. The other book that I have to ask everyone to read that's also part of my class is this book called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Professor Ibram Kendi. Again, I'm lucky in my geographic location. Dr. Kendi has recently moved to be professor here in my neighborhood in Boston University, leading a research center on anti-racism. I'm a space engineer, but my goal is actually to develop research abilities to combine anti-racism with our space engineering research so that all of us could then ask ourselves, what am I doing in my job? Any job you might have in the space community, anything that you're designing or building or leading, you can ask yourself, how can I be anti-racist while I do it? It simply means asking two questions. Number one, you have to read the history of racism that Dr. Kendi provides and first ask, am I bringing anything from the history of racist ideas and policies in the United States and repeating those in my work? And number two, when I do the outcomes of my work, when I evaluate who's benefiting and who's experiencing, whether it's a communication system, a hardware system, whether it's an event, who's benefiting, and are people from different racial groups benefiting equally? Our approach asks us to evaluate this constantly in our organizations and our engineering. And so we're going to keep exploring this, and I'm teaching a class on it in the fall, but I'm really excited to share it with the space community in this coming year.
Thank you very much, Danielle. And in fact, for our viewers, Danielle is hosting a session on tomorrow, and we're so grateful, Danielle. Camille, would you like to share with us your thoughts on any takeaways and what you see as you think about the future and our hopes for the future?
Absolutely. And Charlie, I'm happy to say I'm a Howard alum too, and Florida A&M. For me, my advice and takeaway is to see our humanity and our brilliance and the ways in which we have and we continue to contribute to space exploration and the ways in which we are excellent and we do it in spite of or despite the biases that often are held against us. My hope and vision for the future is that we think about as we think about going to Mars with humans, that it starts here, right, with us on Earth, creating truly diverse, inclusive, equitable, and positive workspaces. Spaces where everyone feel valued and they feel appreciated for who they are and what they bring to the table, and where everyone truly feels empowered to bring their whole and best and authentic self. Like, that's been a theme for me, right? Because I truly believe that. I think only then would we have work environments that produce really innovative and creative solutions to meet the challenges that we face in the future with space exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. When we think about exploration is all about the possibilities that lie beyond, right? It's about thinking about things that go beyond our wildest imaginations and realizing those visions. So Leland, would you mind sort of bringing this all together for us as we think about the future? What are your hopes? What are your dreams for the future?
Thank you, JR and panelists. You guys are amazing and wonderful and inspiring me. I think about the most incredible thing that happened to me when I was off the planet, and Charlie and I have had that opportunity to go off the planet and look back at the planet. And we were doing these technical things. You know, I was installing the Columbus laboratory, the European Space Agency's laboratory, to the International Space Station. I thought that was going to be my aha moment. But it wasn't until Peggy Whitson, the first female commander, invited us over to the Russian segment to have this meal. We were breaking bread at 17,500 miles per hour. We're going around the planet every 90 minutes. And we were doing it with Russian, French, German, African American, Asian American, the first female commander of the International Space Station, breaking bread in space. And that was when my head exploded. And I had this epiphany about our planet. And looking back at it, getting this thing called the perspective shift, the orbital perspective that Frank White had coined in his book, Orbital Perspective. And I think we as a civilization need to take that thing that we get in space as astronauts. And we know that if we don't work together as a team, and we were one of the most diverse teams in space, if we didn't work together, then we would perish. And I think that is the only way that we're going to survive as a humanity on this planet, the only way that we're going to get to Mars, get back to the moon. But the way we do it is with the right perspective. And we bring this perspective home from space to go back to space as a civilization of diverse people living, working, eating, loving each other together. And that's my hope of the future of space, of us going to Mars, is that we have that same type of crew on ISS in February 7th of 2008. It's perspective together, that we work together, we live together, and we change the universe together. Godspeed.
Thank you. I want to take a moment to thank our panelists, our distinguished panelists, for sharing your stories. And unfortunately, we're out of time. We're not going to be able to take some of the questions that people have put forward for our panelists, but we promise that we will get the answers to you. They're going to answer them, and we'll get that posted. Thank you. JR, is there anything you'd like to say?
I just echo, Sian, what you said. Panelists, we're so grateful for you lending your voices for today's discussion. What we've discussed today really runs the political gamut. When we think about some individuals that we mentioned today, like Kamala Harris, and then we have on the other side of the ideological spectrum, the Condoleezza Rices, who are out there, and she's also talked about her experience growing up in the Deep South. So there's this sort of common thread here that unites us all. But again, thank you so much. Thank you to Explore Mars for including this session as part of the diversity series as we continue listening to diverse voices and thinking about how we all can work together to realize our visions for exploration.